All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation of Accelerating Software Delivery, Unifying Application and Database Changes in Modern CI/CD, brought to you by Harness and D-Zone. My name is Katie Bavoso, and I'll be serving as your host today. If you're getting slowed down while programming new code because of bottlenecks when changing databases, we're hoping today's presentation will help you unlock your full potential by speeding up that process. In a moment, I'll be joined by the Harness team themselves. We have Eric Minnick, Director of DevOps Solutions, and Matt Schillerstrom, Director of Product. A quick note before we get started, please feel free to use the chat feature to comment on the presentation as Eric and Matt are sharing. We'll be having a Q&A session after today's presentation, so please drop your questions in the QA section as they come to mind. That way we can make sure we have them ready when it's time. Now, please join me in welcoming Eric and Matt. Hi, gentlemen.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it. Let's get started. So today, like Katie mentioned, we're going to talk about accelerating software delivery and specifically talking about database DevOps and how we can help you out there. So first off, who are these guys? So my name is Matt Schillerstrom. Like Katie mentioned, I'm a director of product at Harness. I've been here almost 3 years. I support a variety of our solutions like chaos engineering, service level objectives for SREs, and my favorite here, database DevOps, which I'll be talking about today. Eric, I'll have you introduce yourself as well.
Sure, Eric Minnick. I've been at Harness for almost 2 years now, not quite as long as Matt, but I've been banging around the DevOps and CI/CD space for most of my career. So I love this space, and I love kind of this intersection of databases and delivery. It's really a fascinating area. So this is going to be a really fun one. Matt,
Yeah.
back to you.
But yeah, like as Eric mentioned too, like I used to work at Target.com in Minnesota, where I live today. There's no snow outside when I look at my window, thank God. but when I was writing, application code, I had a huge database team, and I would just hand off what I needed from them and just work with them, and I loved it. But what I will show you today in a demo and everything, hopefully it will change your mind on how you want to work with your database team in the future. But yeah, before that too, Eric and I, work at Harness. We started out as a CD company for continuous delivery, but since then we've built multiple modules and solutions on top of that. And we like to pride ourselves in, saying we're AI native, not just Gen AI stuff. We've been doing AI since the beginning back in 2018 with machine learning. And, each of our modules can be used independently, or there's a better together story. And that's what Eric and I are telling you today with CD and database DevOps as well. But yeah, let's get started. So the agenda here, we'll talk through CD, why databases matter for CD, what is database DevOps, how database DevOps helps, and a demo and a Q&A. So Eric, I will hand it over to you.
All right, yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about kind of that fit of databases and modern CD, and like this idea of modern CD, because we're like in 2025, and we look back and like the book on CD is 15 years old now. I looked it up; it came out in 2010, and still a lot of us are, trying to do CD with a CI tool that came out in 2004. Right, probably not optimal. So if we're thinking about like how are we going to do like modern CD, what are the components of this, right? Well, we want our deployments to be safe. We want to have confidence in these. We want, when we release it to work. We're going to want to do some governance stuff, but we want that governance not to ruin the lives of our developers. We want it to scale in a way that like the configuration scales. Like we're going to try to avoid this idea where like all of our pipelines are these snowflakes that we're crafting out of artisanal beard oil and stuff. So we want to get a little better. So let's dive into these a little bit more, and then we're going to apply that to the database side next. So let's hop on to the next slide real quick. All right. So number one thing, we need pipelines that are powerful and flexible and good, right? So we certainly need these things to be as code. Problem with code is like unless you're the matrix guy, it can be a little hard to wrap your head around like what you're seeing. So you want a picture for that code. Ideally, that picture is something you can work with, and you can drag and drop that picture and edit the picture or the code. I like working with the code for find and replace stuff, and the picture for macro changes. Your pipeline technology should make some advanced stuff easy. Like you should be able to do loops. If you're doing like a canary deployment, you should be able to just express, I want to do a canary deployment here, and that should just work. You shouldn't have to script that stuff. And then you should be able to account for manual stuff, right? I know we want to automate all of our pipeline things, but it's pretty normal that you're going to want to do an approval when you're going to deploy to production, or some other, or maybe an approval when you want to roll back. Just some sort of manual interaction needs to be able to fit into our pipelines pretty cleanly. So if you can do that, you're going to be in a good place if all the other stuff is in the right place. So let's keep going, Matt. Let's hop on to the next one. All right. I mentioned rollbacks. I'm an optimist, but when it comes to CD, I got to think like a pessimist a little bit. And some of our deployments are going to fail. And I need to think in terms of how am I going to figure out that it's not working? And then how am I going to fall back? I want to make sure that I've got a rollback strategy in place for a failure at any point in my deployment. So I need to tap into where I detect that's going to happen, and then kick off that rollback either automatically or at least call out to a person and say, hey, it looks broke. You should probably roll it back. So that means integrating with my observability tools, with my logging tools, and making an automatic shift through my CD system into that rollback. That's going to enable progressive delivery, and it should account for my progressive delivery strategy. So if I'm doing a canary deployment, my rollback should know that I'm doing a canary deployment and roll back based on a canary. If I'm doing blue-green, it should flip from blue to green and go back the other way, right? That should be built in. And this should be true both for deploying the bits or for features. Kind of Matt's other passion in life, I know. So if I'm doing a feature delivery, I might not be as much about the performance. It might be whether this new feature is making us more money, right? Especially if I'm in a .com and I'm B2C business, right? If I'm B2B, it might be a different kind of check. But we should be looking, does the software make the world better? Does it make our customers more successful, our users more successful? And if it does, roll out further. If not, pull it back. That should be increasingly automated. That's modern continuous delivery. Let's keep going. What else is modern? Governance. I know it's a little icky to talk about, but we need to govern how things go out the door. We can't just take total trash and put it in production and hope for the best, right? We're gonna have rules like if there's horrendous security problems, we don't put it in production. That's gonna happen in most of our enterprises. Now, what ends up happening in a lot of places is we tell our developers don't do that, and then it happens anyway. And then we lock our developers out of the pipelines, and that's bad. So what we wanna do is take the governance out of the pipeline itself and put it off to the side, right? And that's what policy as code allows us to do, is we write the policy outside of the pipeline and we have it govern the pipeline from outside, right? So that if I try to run a pipeline that deploys a vulnerable app to production, it stops it. Now, the nice thing is that allows me to let my developers run that pipeline. I get to give them that permission. And I also can write a policy that says, you have to run the security scan, so I know that you're doing this. Now I can also let my developers edit the pipeline. And if they delete the step that runs the security scan, the policy says, nope, you can't save that. Or no, I'm going to reject that pull request automatically because I know the contents of it. So if you can have a policy as code system that can sit outside of the pipeline and yet govern it, then you can give a lot of that power back to your developers. And that's what I mean by governance that developers love. So policy as code is kind of our favorite way of doing this, but any sort of approach that you can find that kind of pulls some of the governance out of the pipeline itself and still governs the pipeline is a win. You're going to want to marry this up with good access control, probably role-based, as well as good auditing and logs, right? Knowing who changed what and what changed. Because someone's going to break something. And you're going to want to know probably who did it, because an auditor is going to want to know. But more importantly, you're going to want to know what changed and how do I go back? Because then you're going to be able to fix it. And if you can't fix things quickly, you're going to find more and more rules pop up for who's allowed to change things, and it's going to get really awkward to change it. If you can change things quickly, then it's easy, right? Then more people can change it, and you're going to be able to have a lot looser permissions. It's safer when you can figure out what changed and fix it. So that's how you get the governance that developers love. You do it right. One or two last things. Next slide. Scaling. All right. We want reuse. And this is not copy and paste. We don't like copy and paste because if I copy one pipeline into another pipeline and I do that 100 times, eventually I'm going to need to change this thing. And then I'm going to have to change 100 things, and that's going to make me sad. I don't want to copy by value. I want to copy by reference. I want to say, I want to use that template, and I'm going to change a couple of values and inject them, right? I want to use a template. And what that means is then I can change the template, and all 100 things also change. Life is good. Good. That will scale. Next big thing, I want to make it easy to do the right thing and difficult to do the wrong thing. That's the graphic that we're trying to have. If there's something that you want your team to do, you want to make that a paved road with flowers all over it and great documentation, and you want to make it as obvious that this is the way to do it, and it's nice and easy to do it. Developers will do the easy thing. Make the right way to do it the easy thing, and it'll happen. Make the wrong way to do things hard. They won't do it very much, right? Make it hard to do it wrong. Mark it as the wrong way to do it and put barriers in the way. And people will stay down the right path. Make it easy to do the right thing, and people do the right thing. All right. One last slide, I think, Matt. Oh, that was it, actually. All right.
Yeah.
So that was my take on modern CD, right? We're going to have powerful pipelines so you can do all the things relatively easily. We're going to make it safe to deploy to production. And then we're going to scale all of this stuff, right, with templates and policies and pointing people in the right direction, make it easy to do the right thing. So that, I think, is kind of this framework that we're trying to bring the database concepts into, right? And databases are pretty damn important, right, Matt?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
So I would say databases matter, right, for sure. But
it's a polite thing, yeah.
Yeah. One comment on this lovely picture Eric drew, right? So when I worked at Target, we called like this happy path of developer experience the yellow brick road. So as teams were, transitioning from our monolithic Target.com to microservices, they went through a yellow brick road path, and we made it easy for them. So I love this concept that you walked through, Eric. So yeah, databases matter, and whether you're a developer here attending or a database administrator, I hope the next 10, 15 minutes of content here kind of show you what we're doing and why, as well as as we move into the demo, kind of show you in reality how we're making it happen. So if I was going to mention, if you can look at your polls, I have a poll that just opened. We have 3 of them today that we'll kind of run through. So if you want to respond to that, that'll help maybe shape Eric and our message here, as well as, if you click on the Q&A, you can actually, ask us some questions and see if you can stump us and everything like that. So that'll work out good. But yeah, let me walk you through, database DevOps, kind of splitting this conversation into two halves, like first, like a walkthrough of the process and value, and then secondly, like a live demo of this. But yeah, we're going to talk through how we're bringing the same DevOps principles we use for applications that Eric just talked about, and apply it for databases for speed, safety, automation, and the like. So databases, the changes are slow. They slow everything down, right? I was used to this, as I previously said, when I worked at Target, like we were fine with this slowness. I don't know, like we wrote some new front end application code and we recognize that databases are hard and challenging and there's multiple environments and there's all these things called like HIPAA and PCI, like all these regulations that, I was not an expert at, but my database team was. So when I needed to like make a new column or change something in the table, like I just handed it over via email or a ticket and let them do their thing. And I was okay with moving slow, right? But it doesn't have to be, is what we're kind of getting at today, right? And most companies that we talk to, that Eric and I interview or talk to with our other product team members, right? They're using, like I said, emails, ServiceNow tickets, or just Slack to kind of manage databases. And that's slow, right? Like Eric pinged me a question in Slack this morning and I didn't respond to him for hours because I was busy doing something else, right? But what if that was a database change you needed to have me make, right? Like I'm not watching that. So it's kind of
and I think that's what we're seeing in the poll, right? Like you got a third of the people they're creating tickets or they're making these changes manually. Ticket-driven communication is slow.
Yeah. And just whatever answer you did, like nothing you're doing is wrong today. It's just what it is, right? And that's just the way things are, but we'll try to convince you of other ways today as well. But we're trying to say, everything is code today, right? Like Eric could have, like his slide deck that he showed you, he could have transitioned that to all YAML files that talked about configuration if he wanted to. But so why not databases, right? And that's where we kind of say, database changes should live in Git, right? Like that's your home. Get in the hole, right? So like you need to have that, right? And a lot of this, why it should live in Git, right? Version control is one thing, right? So you can kind of tell a story about how you're changing your database and environments over the weeks, months, and years, right? Because why do people care how databases change other than making sure your applications work? Audit, right? Auditors like to look at that, especially if you're in banks and other healthcare industries like that. So let's talk a little bit about the database challenges. Right. So just to kind of level set, like why database deployments matter for apps, right? Most of us probably know, but for a few maybe that don't, right? Like if your application, you want to now add a login UI, like where do you store that username and password, right? So in a database, right, you'll have a column and rows, for username, admin, and password and all that kind of stuff. So that's why we exist today, right? And some of the slowness that causes these challenges, right? So the manual DB changes, devs have to wait for the DBA to apply schema changes to production, but not only production, but like 10 other environments going up to that, right? Also a lack of visibility, right? Lack of single pane of glass, right? So like the developer maybe pushes a ticket through, but they don't know where in the process like that database change is happening. So that leads to also like environment drift, especially if people are doing one environment and then the next environment, and then maybe the next day they're doing the other environment, right? So we see configuration drift as we're managing that manually. And then no guardrails too, like so slow manual SQL review, right? And approval processes due to lack of automated governance. So as a developer, I might help write some SQL statements that I give to my DBA just to help them out, but I need them to review, right? And that's all manual. And that's where we see, database changes are a big source of these release slowdowns. And I think we have another poll that if you could kind of click over to and answer, that'd be interesting to see where you're at with your biggest concerns of automating database changes, right? But what we see is, definitely like silos happening between application teams and DBA teams. These manual applied SQL scripts just create issues, right? Because people have mistakes in there that aren't getting checked. This ultimately leads to like production outages, right? Which is scary, especially in big changes. Not having a like rollback path, like it's easy to say, yep, I'll just roll back. But what does that really mean, especially across 5 environments? And ultimately, like as a product manager myself, right? Like I have deadlines I want to meet for rolling out new features. And that can be pretty predictable, but sometimes with database schema changes and whatnot, it's harder to be predictable, right? But yeah, if I look at the poll here, it seems, breaking production or causing downtime, data loss, corruption, lack of visibility, difficulty coordinating across teams. Yeah. Yeah. Eric, did you answer the poll too, or which one?
No, it's one of those things we always think about how we should do these polls before we put them out. Now I'm wondering if we should have had 2 questions on breaking production or causing downtime. Because,
Yeah.
If you've got a database, sometimes you have this inherent like, well, maybe I need to take the app down to fiddle with the database.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see that pattern a lot. And usually we figured out how not to do that anymore, but I wonder if those are 2 different answers.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Anybody has a question about that, feel free to ask a question on that and we'll answer it in Q&A.
we'll look at or we'll look at chat. But yeah, that seems to be breaking production or losing data. That seems to be the biggest one. But there's answers everywhere.
Yeah. So just to talk through, the pain of delivery, right? Just because I'm hoping there's developers and DBAs on the call and we can all empathize with like what we're feeling, right? But these manual change processes that we gotten used to are slow and tiring, right? We have a lot of disjointed tools across the applications and databases. Like maybe we're using, a great CI/CD tooling, but then we're all manual scripts for database schema changes, and that disjointed causes, confusion as well as just like, onboarding a new engineer and teaching him the ropes here. It takes a while, right? And we're also seeing like the lack of integration between app and database changes too. So maybe I have full visibility as my app, gets deployed and released, but then the databases I'm tracking manually just by looking at like maybe a Jira ticket status. And there's leading into, no single view of these states or changes, as well as, like manually like looking at all the SQL governance, which I'll get into in the demo too, where like somebody can accidentally drop a table, which is not good, right? So we need to have some governance in place so we don't do those bad things as well. And then ultimately, I always, as a product manager, I like to think about like the business and what we experience, right? But slow time to market for product and services, increased deployment risk, which leads back to our poll question of, downtime and deployment failures. Ultimately, like hard to identify root cause of database issues. I also work on another module at Harness called incident response, right? And this is where like an incident happens with a database, like it's challenging and scary, right? But if we can like understand like what changed and when, it's easier to do those rollbacks or at least the notifications so everybody's on the same page with that. And that ultimately leads to increased cost of everything. And then difficult to control that compliance equals risk, especially as we're moving fast. There's a lot of stories about how app teams can deliver code to production multiple times a day, right? That's scary and fast, right? Especially if you went from like quarterly to monthly to weekly to daily. But if you look at database schema changes and all, like how do we couple that together so that they can be in tune? All right. So what exactly is database DevOps? So like how Harness likes to think about this, database DevOps brings structure and automation and safety to your databases through like these capabilities that we like to talk about. So first of all, version management. And if you remember a few slides ago, I talked about, Git, right? Why can't the database change live in Git? So we can treat like the SQL scripts just like application code, right? So changes are tracked in Git using something called a change set. And we bundle all the SQL scripts, version, and have it organized. And what that means, so every change that you do is traceable, right? DBAs and developers can collaborate in one place, and you can manage those schema evolutions in a structured and audible way, right? Also, that leads into orchestration. So as Eric was like, all of his slides talked about orchestration, right? And database pipelines can, with these version changes, you can apply these across all of your environments. So you have that orchestration. So just like releasing app code across, environments through deploy and release, you can do the same thing with database changes as well, right? So the database and the app change can be together in like this single pipeline. You can have automatic rollbacks in place when needed, as well as like this removes like the nighttime firefighting maybe that the DBA has to do like once the code is in production, right? Like it seems like the DBA is maybe always the last person that, hurry up, do this quick. Also, another like pillar that I like to talk about, which Eric emphasized as well, is governance, right? So using like open policy agent, DBAs can enforce guardrails. One of the big questions I always get is like from the DBA as well. I want to teach the developer like how to, build databases and change databases, but like I still want to be in control of that. That's my job, right? And all we're doing here is the DBA can put all these policies in place just so that they're structured and organized and repeatable and making it easy, the yellow brick road, like Eric was talking about, for the app teams, right? So it's a beautiful way of, taking that mindset and giving it to developer in a pipeline so it's repeatable, right? And ultimately what that means is it's self-service, right? So developers, without compromising safety, they can, be enabled to push changes to production. And lastly, visibility around that. So you can know exactly like when your change set was moved to an environment or rolled back, and you can kind of see the status over all of your environments if it's ready to go. Because that's ultimately like if you don't do database changes, that's where like a product manager never really has to look at the database changes that happens. Like, but this gives them views as to say like when it's released into each environment, which especially helps with like beta testing and whatnot. So, all right. So I want to talk a little bit about like who cares about database DevOps, and I think we have one more poll here just to kind of understand who's here and everything. So we'll let that go through as we talk. I'm just looking at chat too to see if there's anything interesting. But yeah, this is great. Thanks for all the engagement here. So let's start with the VP of DevOps, right? So they want to, drive standardization, right, across the organization, whether that's through tools, processes, or procedures. They're focused on challenges of operationalizing everything, right, making it consistent. They want to trust like their subordinates, the people that work for them, to have speed-oriented features without breaking anything. The manager, like or director of DevOps, or if you think about like an SRE who's controlling production, they're always concerned about inefficiencies in DevOps delivery, right? Or the perception that the current stack isn't good enough. They want to accelerate software delivery, right, without failing on compliance and governance, right? So they don't want to be the gate for production readiness, but they don't want to be the bottleneck or slowness. And they want those database changes to stop slowing down the application delivery as well. And if you think about like a platform engineering executive, they're focused on the developer effectiveness or their satisfaction. They deliver internal products for consumption. Like what are the DevOps tools, right? So if you think about like a new engineer getting onboarded, like what tools are they working with? They want to give developers as much control as possible while maintaining compliance and all that. And then the database administrator, wants devs to do the right thing in a compliant, safe manner, and gatekeeps database access, to ensure data integrity and database stability. All right, so I'm just looking at the poll just to kind of see as well. So scrolling down. So it seems like, a third, it's a dedicated DBA or database team. Perfect. Seen about that for application developers as well. Yep. And some shared responsibility. So I think that kind of aligns with what I hear too. How about you, Eric? Does that seem to align?
Yeah, and that matches. It's interesting that we don't hear a lot of the shared responsibility, but I think those crisp demarcations make it easy and faster. Like collaboration sounds good, but it's also slow.
Yeah. Awesome. But yeah, so this integrated database solution with CD, right? So what does it ultimately mean, right? And what we see for developers, right? Putting stuff in source control, declaring the order of operations for how databases happen, reporting on what's there, and then tooling to enforce database policies. All these things, all these words I'm saying is basically what Eric was saying for applications, right? Except for databases, right? And this experience, that we're creating, right, is we want zero to minimal scripting, right? We don't want the application team having to like do all the SQL statements, right? They can just use what's there. Having the integrated solution between application, database changes and releases, having unified change management is another experience I want to have. Automated enforcement of SQL best practices through governance. And what that leads into from a business perspective, right, is increased revenue because you're moving faster and safer, decreased remediation times for database changes. I think we've all been through those issues where we're deploying database schema changes, through multiple environments. And there's a couple environments where there's configuration drift where it gets stuck and you have to do rollbacks, and that becomes the bottleneck. And ultimately like drives costs. And then what we can do, as we have app and database changes, leveraging like feature flags too, like we can make more informed experimentation with not only app changes, but data changes as well. So we can have more intricate features that we're releasing. And then ultimately, if we have fewer compliance issues, the risk gets lower. So, all right, so now I'm going to transition over to our demo environment. But before that, I'm just going to check in the chat to see if there's anything else. Looks like we're good. But yeah, thanks for doing the 3 polls, and I'll just advertise if you want to post some questions in Q&A throughout the demo too. We'll kind of take your feedback. All right. So I'm just getting my screens adjusted here. All right. And Eric, just to check, you can see my Harness app.
Yep.
This is fine. Appreciate it. Thanks. All right. So this is the Harness Database DevOps UI. And as you can see, this is just the overview. So now like we can actually see, pipeline executions. We can see our last change set and how it rolled through every environment as well. In this case, we have a bunch of environments, but some of my banking customers that we're working with you have to scroll all the way to the right more and more and more with all the environments that they have updated as well. But what I was going to talk through is this change set and where this exists today. So we'll look at this Git repo. In this case, it's Harness's code repository for our source code management. But it's a change set. So basically, it's a list of SQL scripts grouped together under tags. It's the source of truth for a database change. And we parse these scripts, version them using Git SHAs, and then track the application across the environments. So what this ends up looking like in a pipeline view here is this. So this is the Harness Database DevOps pipeline. Every module at Harness gets this whole pipeline experience. So even my chaos engineering module, it's not just injecting faults into the system, it's orchestrating this whole end-to-end test. And in this case, with Harness Database DevOps, I have this pipeline where I'm initializing the change. And I'm actually going to run this. It'll take like a minute. So I'm just going to rerun this just to kind of talk through. We'll just get it a second here. Perfect. All right. So I'm actually taking that change set that I was showing you before, and I'm initializing the database, and I'm going to apply the migration and walk through the step. If I switch over to console view, I can actually kind of see what happens through initialization, cloning the database, importing the change. And what's great about all this is, we can track it, right? So if I go back to this view, even though this is only taking a few minutes, we can actually see where it's at in the state of everything. And if the demo gods play well, I won't have to click to a previously run one, but this is working today, which is great. But you can actually see all the change sets that I put in. It'll give it a tag automatically, so you can understand like if you need to roll back, right? So there's that historical view of everything. You're not just like looking back in a Jira ticket and all that. So if I go back to console view here, I can see all the steps. And again, this is me working with my database administrator to put in the process so I can correctly update my database schema changes for this. So finish tagging, and now it's applying the schema change. And if I go back here, so it finished the apply, I'm gonna move over, and it's just finishing up the tag, and it'll wrap up here to complete that database change. And what's great about this, right, again, how quickly it happened, right? You can make this repeatable. So actually have this pipeline set to trigger off that repo change. So as a developer changes the code, like this in that change set, this pipeline will kick off. So thus, like the database administrator has enabled the developer to make as many changes as they want in the safety and control and governance of this pipeline and template, right? And that DBA can also take this, if this template is like, say, a golden template, they can take this and give it to other app teams too, right? Just to make it stupid easy, as I like to say, right? So it's actually just a brilliant way to do this, right? And again, what's great about this is it's consistent, right? So it's not like I have to recreate this pipeline every single time. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about what that could look like in a big orchestration pipeline as well too. So this is a previously run end-to-end pipeline of like all the hardest modules working together, where I'm doing build tests with continuous integration, using infrastructure as code management to push up the new development cluster, deploying to a development environment, right? And here I have, again, I'm calling that same database pipeline that I'm using built into this template across development, QA, and into production here, which you can see. And I'm showing this screen too, because as I walk through this map, and one funny story, when I was doing a demo in person at AWS reInvent, somebody had asked, hey, this is a great map, but where do you write the custom code and the scripts for everything? And I just was like, well, there's not really scripts, right? These are steps and stages with pre-configured configuration that Harness provides, right? So you're not like having to script out manual spaghetti Jenkins scripts with all this, right? This is just creating this beautiful view, right? But you can also change it to like a YAML view too, so you can see that as code. But what you see is what you get here. So again, that previous database pipeline I ran on the other screen, this is how it would run through as well. But in this case, Harness actually has a canary deployment that we're doing with this deployment as well. We're actually running some chaos engineering tests to proactively test the resiliency, and it actually failed. That's what you see as exclamation point. And now it's doing the automatic rollback based upon all these changes as well for the environment. So that safety and control it provides as far as automatic rollback, the developer, the DBA team, the platform team can work together to decide what those rollback triggers are and those failure strategies should be. All right, the last thing I was going to talk about in this demo before we move into Q&A what was a Jira ticket. So what's always funny about the Jira tickets is I just wanted to kind of showcase how like developers work with DBAs, like they write a ticket. In this case, the developer is giving, the SQL injections and saying it's pretty good. But what I like to show at the bottom, like maybe the developer's like, hey, can you run this on prod before the release this Friday? It shouldn't be risky. Also, can you double check the column types? I wasn't sure what to use, right? So like the developer has to manually look at all these scripts, right? And ask like, did I test this? Why are we dropping a column in production? Do we have a backup of this? And ultimately, like the problems that you see with this process across the board, right? With no version tracking, no rollback define, like this is day in, day out what the DBA has to go through with the developer. And what I was going to talk about, like they don't have to with like our governance that we have in place. So like all these questions that I'm asking as a DBA, I can put these questions into answers with policies, right? So for example, like that Jira ticket had a drop table step in there, which is a big no-no, generally speaking, right? So I can actually create a policy in Harness Database DevOps to actually make sure people aren't dropping tables, right? And then the policy exists here such that the DBA approves it. The DBA can make every pipeline template have this, right? And if the developer tries to bypass these policies or steps, it'll actually block them, right? So you can actually have, programmatically make this into your pipeline for consistency and governance and all that. So that's kind of it for sure. The last part of what I was going to talk about too, which is saved for another webinar topic, is we actually can integrate with a tool called DB Marlin for performance. So we can actually take your database change and look at performance of everything. So if I go to a couple screens here and click just as an example, I can actually kind of look at each database and look at the performance of everything that I have and if it's changed, which is another great way to kind of like look at the safety of your database and reliability, is the performance of that as well. Cool. So I'm going to step back into the slides and then we'll move into the quick Q&A as well. There's some resources that are in like the CTAs and the resources document that Katie and team set up. So please click into that. But just to kind of overview again about Harness, we founded in 2017. This past year, we became a leader in the MQ for DevOps platforms. We've been working with 900 plus customers and we use our own product. We have millions and millions of pipeline runs. We use feature flags to release to our customers and test. And all the modules on this screen is kind of like the timeline of how we release things over the years, but we always listen for feedback from our customers and implement that into a solution, which often ends up being a new module, as you see on this screen as well. And last but not least too, this is a beautiful pipeline visual that I have, which talks about the experience that Eric and I talked about today with CI/CD and database DevOps all in one solution. So we can move into Q&A and kind of jump into that.
Awesome. Sounds great, and great job today, guys. Thank you so much. We do have some cues for the answers to be put to. So let me start with the first one that we had come in today in the chat. This one is from Vass, I believe. Coexisting of two versions of app, in parentheses, from DB perspective, during Canary is also a big challenge. Are there strategies for that? How would you respond?
Yeah, so yeah, I wanted to go into, because I know that the theory here is you have this idea of this expand contract pattern where if you've got this breaking schema change, you want to first make a change where you're often going to like create an expansion of your database where your database will work for both the new and the old version of your app, right? And that's something you have to test in your test environment, right? You'll make that happen. And so then during your Canary or whatever time where you're going to have multiple versions of your service running, you have that go. And then as part of a cleanup process you run later, you'll have another database change that comes up and cleans it up, a contraction of the database system. So in a way, it's not like rocket science, but it's a thing you actually have to do and a thing you have to test. It's like big complication as you try to marry up database change with kind of these sophisticated rollout strategies and try to get to a zero downtime safe deployment when you're dealing with stateful apps. Matt, do you want to add to that at all?
I think you covered it, Eric. If people have more questions in chat with that, we can.
Okay.
All right. Let's go on to the next one that I have here. Let's see. Will there be some sort of integration with NET-EF co-core migrations?
Yeah, so Harness Database DevOps is a new module we launched last year, and as we support more and more databases, things like this are definitely on our roadmap. What I can say, so if you're using, Liquibase for schema changes, SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, Mongo, or Google Spanner, those are all databases that we support today for schema changes. And then on our roadmap, we have a huge list of databases we're going to continuously expand. And if you think about like with Harness CD back in the day when we launched that in 2017, 2018, we supported the primary databases and then gradually grew and grew and grew to support like everything today, right? And that's where we're at with database DevOps too. So would love to learn more about your use case, what you're using today, and talk. So feel free to sign up for a demo at any point with us, and Eric and I would love to talk with you. So.
All
Cool.
right, fantastic. Let's go on from there. If someone already has a manual database deployment process, what's the easiest first step to modernize it?
Yeah, I can take that one too. So basically, I always like to say like start small but be smart, or like I'll say like start slow but don't be slow to start, right? Jump in. And many of our new customers and prospects that we're working with, like they definitely have this manual process they're working for. So the easiest first step I like to say is, version control of your schema changes, putting it in Git, and then running them through our Harness pipeline, like in a non-production environment, right? You never start in prod with anything. You start in lower environments and promote through. But this is where you can add like the basic guardrails for approvals, right? A lot of time, you're working in Jira ticket systems anyways, but you can take that Jira ticket and put it in our pipeline to automate all that approval as well. So you can actually kind of start that way with version control, and then slowly shift ownership to dev teams with those policies and templates in place. So the DBA can be in control from the very beginning. Starting out with these guardrails for policies that I was kind of showing before, with like dropping a table. And then once you approve that policy, giving it to the developer and enabling them. So cool. All right.
All right. Sorry, did you want to add to that?
Nope, I'm good with that. So we can go to the next question.
Fabulous. We did have another one come through that I'm excited about. So I do want to ask this one of you. What does it mean to be AI native in the description? I think, so this is a question I think that we've answered in many different ways when we hear about AI these days. So I think this is a good one to keep in mind when we're saying AI native. What are we talking about?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it. And Matt, then you can clean up my mess after I get this wrong. No, so I think for Harness, we've had AI and ML capabilities kind of woven through the products from the very beginning, right? That was the first trick, right, for our continuous delivery, was bringing in that integration with observability platforms and applying AI to the data coming out of there to decide whether we should do that rollback, right? We were native AI from the beginning. And since then, we're weaving in AI to everything we're doing, especially with the explosion of options that you have with the modern LLMs, right? That's everything from looking at a failed build or deployment, combing through the logs and applying an LLM to that to figure out, okay, what's the step to remediate this build, right? What should a developer do to fix the build and get going again? All the way out to, optimizing experiments, where we were talking about doing policy as code, right? How do you write policies if you're not an expert in Rego, right? So applying this idea of AI coding assistant to coding policies, right? So bringing in these AI capabilities in lots and lots of different ways to eliminate the toil associated with standing up DevOps platforms, maintaining them, and all of that, so that you can spend your time writing code and delivering for your customers and not spending nearly as much time fiddling around with the DevOps stuff. Matt, what did I miss?
That was great. I mean, speaking from experience, and our chaos engineering product that I love too, like the AI native behind that too. So all the features that we're building now, like the customer doesn't even know we're using like AI behind some of it. So like we're providing recommendations and fixes for these resiliency tests as an example, where we're leveraging like our AI in the platform, right? I think about it, like when we first started talking about like API gateways back in the day when companies were starting using this, like it's almost like Harness is building this gateway of AI, right? So every service can consume it. And to the customer, they obviously can opt in or opt out of using AI technology, but we're building it natively in the platform, right? So that is just part of the feature set that we're using. Yeah, we can move on to the next question too.
All right, good, because we got one. So I'll go into that one right now. How is DB DevOps different and or better than using migration tools like Liquibase or Flyway?
Yeah, so if you're using Liquibase today for your schema changes, Harness can go over on top of that. So we can provide the orchestration across multiple environments, the governance and the visibility, so that you don't have to just use like this command line interface, the CLI of Liquibase, for example. And if you're using like the open source Flyway as well, right, we'll be able to orchestrate those as well. So really with Harness, with these schema changes, we're providing the management layer, right, the orchestration and the governance, and the visibility of that across those tooling. Cool.
So it's kind of like you have a build script and you put a CI tool on top of it. Here you've got a database migration scripting language and you're putting a management layer on top.
Yeah. But a fun management layer, not like boring. So
we're a cool mom, not your regular mom. Yeah, exactly. I like that a lot. All right, so one that I'm interested in, because I think a lot of us are prone to mistakes as human beings. This one is, what are some common mistakes that teams make when automating database changes, and how can tools like Harness help?
Why don't you start, Matt?
Yeah, so like one of the most common like pitfalls we see is like treating database changes like purely as code. And what I mean by that is like they're like blindly like not implementing the policies and the governance with that. So when people are doing these database changes, like we always couple up these policies with it so that again, we're not breaking anything in production or having downtime. So like maybe the developer is like a little overconfident and they're running some destructive changes without those safeguards. So they really need to work with the DBA on their team, right, to kind of programmatically work through this. And Harness provides best practices and tutorials and documentation. But again, you got to respect the DBA and what they're doing, because they've likely been working at your company a long time and know all the environments. And also, like I see people like skipping proper versioning controls or not having a rollback plan in place, and et cetera. But yeah, Eric, anything you want to add over the top?
No, I think that's reasonable.
That's perfect.
All right, we've got under 5 minutes left, so I think we can get another question and at least one more. So let's go with, is Harness an extension to DevOps, or how does it integrate with DevOps? Ruminate on that one for me.
I'll try. So it's a DevOps platform, right? So Matt was sharing some of our stats, and Gartner highlighted us as a leader in the DevOps platform market, right? So we kind of play in that space where we have tools in the DevOps space that come together as a platform to support teams doing DevOpsy things, right? So CI, CD for DevOps, or CD for databases, I mean to say. All of that sort of stuff in that area. Harness is a company that provides those solutions. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say in that same vein, what kinds of teams or roles would you say benefit the most from unifying application and database deployment? So I think this kind of dovetails nicely into that last question. And when you think about it, where do you see the most value?
Yeah, let me just run through each kind of role. Like, I'm seeing developers gain autonomy by managing these schema changes with their application code, right? They're not just like chucking over the fence the database person to figure out. The DBAs like get their guardrails, and visibility into the system. Like they're not having to manually scan all this, SQL stuff to see like where people dropping tables. Like they can put a policy in place to automate that. um, Platform teams, right? Like tool sprawl is a real thing, right? So if they can consolidate services and tools together, especially in one pipeline, that's the beautiful story. And then if we have any like release managers on the phone on the webinar, right? Like they can finally treat database changes like first class citizens and release pipelines, right? So with app changes, it's super easy for release managers, but with database changes, they're always like, okay, now I got to babysit this even more. So now I can do less babysitting. So it's kind of a perfect way to talk through that.
We did have
Okay.
one more come through, and we do have a couple minutes left, so let's give it a shot. How does integrating database changes into CI/CD improve release confidence overall?
ooh, that's so good. I think the fewer special things you have to deal with, the better, right? The more consistency you have, the more confidence you're going to have, right? I know that whatever change I have, right, whether that's application code, infrastructure code, database code, whatever that is, it's going to go through the same pipeline. It's going to be approved the same way. It's going to be tested the same way. It is going to go to production the same way. We're going to validate it the same way. It's going to be rolled back the same way. It's going to work. And that's what you want at the end of the day, is for it to work, for there to be no drama, and just smooth, calm, relaxed, and boring. I want my releases to be super duper boring. That's my goal. This should be super simple, super boring, and out of the way and fast. So that's my thought. Matt, anything?
I love it. I'm actually going to our marketing website and using that same quote you just said to brand our company now. So no drama, boring, simple. Love it.
Still cool, but boring.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you everyone who is watching and who's joined us today. If you have any lingering questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat now and someone will get back to you. We will make sure that you get those answers. And if you'd like to explore more, you could check out the link on your screen and see more about Harness. But thank you so much to Eric and Matt. Thank you all for watching. Once again, I'm Katie Bavoso, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.